took my first steps towards making sculpture in the very early 1980s when I did pottery at school. And then after some angst and worry, I decided to go to do a foundation course at art school. And then from there I studied ceramics for 3 years in Bristol. Because of my background in ceramics, I got very drawn to working with clay, and I think I've actually used the same clay for nearly 40 years. But it's gone in lots of different directions. I use steel, I use plaster, bronze, oil paint, external paint. But the beginning is clay, and then the bronze and the plaster is really so that I can make copies. I can make different versions of the same piece. But clay is where my heart is, for sure. So the studio is a second home, and there are good and bad aspects of working from home. So I'll come over here to get something, and then I'll end up being in the studio much longer than I expected. But the studio is a kind of private space in a way, I suppose. It's where the ideas are and where a lot of the work's kept. It's funny, people do ask me how long they take, and you want to say, well, 25 years to learn how to do it and then 2 weeks to make it. So I'm not really sure whether how long it's not that important, I suppose, and it is a slow process. Some work comes very fast, other pieces are much harder to get to the end of, and I, in a practical way, they're clay, then it either is fired in the kiln or moulded. Normally the bigger pieces I'll have a mould maker come to the studio, and then there's a long process of wax, more mould making, casting it in sections in bronze, welding it together, working out the support structure within the piece. So it can be up to a year. To a very big piece might take me that long, while doing other work in parallel with it. There isn't an easy, I can't give an easy message to what the work's about. I think art is essentially a non-verbal communication, so for me to try to explain my own reasons for making something isn't necessarily helpful for the viewer. You know, the work, it's an extension of me and my beginnings, I suppose. You know, it starts in the studio, but ultimately, whether the pieces are in the gallery or the public realm, you know, I'm not going to stand next to it explaining it to someone. You know, somebody might come across a sculpture going to work and quite rightly, you know, ignore it for the first 2 or 3 times, and maybe the 4th time they go past, they'll think, well, who is that, or what is that? And that's a responsibility as well, you know, and I care deeply about how they're shown, where they're shown, and it's why actually I avoid making anything exactly life-size, because we have a gut reaction to sculpture that mimics life, because it's actually quite uncomfortable. So my pieces are always either smaller or larger, so there's room. funny thing about making figures is that I think it taps into this ability we have to read the human form. We notice clothing and body language, a look in the eye, and I think we generally make judgments and decisions about people very rapidly. So with this in mind, when I make my pieces, I try as hard as I can to keep the identity of the individual anonymous, and to then try to engage with what I call the psychology of scale by making the sculptures deliberately either smaller or larger than life. I don't have a set meaning as to who the figures are or what they might be doing, but there is always a hidden narrative that will be affected by the time of day, the weather, the seasons, and of course what's in the mind of the viewer when they happen to come across the sculpture. Having said that, obviously I have my own motivations for making them, and most are based on real people or a combination of real people that I've met and spent time with and then photographed. Occasionally they'll sit for me too. On a personal level, I'm drawn to people who are emotionally present and who, either consciously or unconsciously, are prepared to reveal elements of their inner life and perhaps even their true selves. As I say, drawn to specific individuals, and it's not so much because of who they are, it's to do with how they are. I think a lot of people quite rightly don't want you to know what they're thinking or feeling, and so, for instance, I don't work with professional models because they're too good at hiding what they're feeling, and that would be a struggle for me to sculpt a model, because I'm really interested in the internal life of the people that I depict or try to depict. Every now and then you'll come across somebody who through their body language or through something about them reveals more, I think, of their inner selves, and those are the people that I like to work with. I think themes develop slowly, and my figures, while it's important to say, while they're nearly all based on individuals, or maybe two or three individuals I might combine in one figure, essentially they're anonymous, and I flag that with the titles, so they're called things like seated man, standing man, walking woman. And the reason there is to sort of keep the specificity of the work kind of open. I'm not excited in telling one story. I want to try and tell multiple stories if I can.